Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for being here, and thank you for inviting me back to IrisCon. It's great to be here. Indeed, my name is Mikko, and many of you remember me as the Finn who was working for this company called F-Secure. Well, F-Secure split up into two different companies this summer, to consumer side and to business side. I'd like to think that the largest cybersecurity company in the Nordics split into the largest and into the second largest cybersecurity company in the Nordics. That's basically what we did. And I work on the WithSecure side nowadays, although I also do advisory work for F-Secure. So I'm still, dabbling in all sides of this company, for which I have indeed worked for since 1991. And since floppy disks were mentioned, some of you know that I always travel with one to remind myself of where I'm coming from. So those of you in the audience who have no idea what this is, it's the USB thumb drive of the 1990s. That's what it is. And indeed, if someone would have told me in the beginning of my career that we would end up here where we are today, I simply would not have believed it. Someone would have told me that we will end up in a situation where we're not fighting teenage boys writing viruses for fun, but we're fighting organized crime gangs, and we're fighting foreign intelligence agencies, and that cyber war is not going to be a thing from science fiction books. It's going to be real. It's really going to happen. All of that would have been impossible for me to believe. The world has changed throughout these years more than any of us could have believed, and it has changed because of the biggest technological revolution ever in mankind's history. So yeah, indeed, the title of my talk is the title of my book, which is, someone called it the Hyppönen law. I think I said it first somewhere on some stage a couple of years ago while speaking about these. Computers that don't look like computers, because these are computers nowadays. Most of us here are computer security people. I'm a computer security guy. I've been a computer security guy all my life. And I used to think that that means that my job is to secure computers. I'm a computer security guy. I secure computers. But slowly and surely, computers have become to look like this. And they've become to look like the PLC systems and OT systems that run our factories. And our cars have become data centers on four wheels. Slowly but surely, everything goes online. Everything becomes a computer. And that means that my job has changed. Our job has changed. We are no longer securing computers. We're securing the society. That's what we're doing. We're not securing computers, because computers run our society. We are securing the whole society. And that's a pretty big responsibility to be put on a bunch of geeks and nerds. We didn't really sign up for securing the whole society, but that's the job we have today. So I spent 7 months writing the book. I clearly couldn't have gotten it out without the pandemic, so thank you, COVID-19, because I was trying to work on this project for a decade and wasn't going anywhere. But then when travel ended, I had no excuses. So my tip for writing a book is to get a really good editor. I did write this by myself. I didn't use no ghostwriters, but you really do need a professional to help you to build up the structure and to give you constructive feedback. I was working with this really experienced editor called Ilona, and she was so nice. Because the way we worked was that I had a deadline every Friday. For 7 months, every Friday, I submitted a factual chapter and then 2 stories or anecdotes. And she would read them through and give me criticism. And when she deleted my stuff, and she deleted a lot of my stuff, she was so nice. She was like, yeah, Mikko, I love this great story. We'll put it in the next book. There we go, deleted. But that's the way we worked, and that's the way we actually got it out. I actually originally wrote it in my native language of Finnish. It was translated to English, and now I just signed up the German translation, which is going to be called Was vernetzt ist angreifbar. You gotta love the Germans, don't you? It's like, they seem angry even when they're not. So, I guess the main theme and the thing I keep repeating in the book is that internet is the best thing and the worst thing which has happened during our time. The upsides are obvious. We all know how much the world has changed for the better. And the downsides are obvious, especially for us who work with computer security. How crime has changed, how risks have changed. It really is the best thing and the worst thing. I love the internet, but I know very well how much it has changed our risk level. And in a nutshell, the reason for both the upsides and downsides is that what internet does is that it deletes geography. Internet deletes geography. Online, there is no distance. There are no distances, there are no borders, there is no geography, which is great if you have a company, which could be anywhere on the planet, but wants to go global. That was really hard to do before the internet. Now, people don't really care where you're from. You are online, you can sell anywhere, especially if you're selling virtual goods. For example, there's gaming companies coming from all parts of the world because it really doesn't matter where you are. That's great. And it's also obvious that the risks have changed when you look at how crime changed from local to global. So my home country of Finland has 5 million people. It's not a very big country. 30 years ago, around 1992, every year, on average, we had 120 bank robberies in my home country of Finland of 5 million people. So twice a week, someone somewhere in Finland grabbed a gun and walked into a bank to steal cash. Twice a week. The last time we had a bank robbery like that was 12 years ago. They are no longer a thing. We don't have bank robberies anymore. Why? Because we have no more banks. The few physical banks we have left have no cash. So bank robbers have done the same thing we all have done. We have digitalized our work. They've gone online. Today's bank robbers don't rob banks with guns to steal cash. No, they use banking Trojans, or they use BEC scams to reroute money traffic inside corporations, or they use keyloggers to collect credit card numbers, or they break into cryptocurrency exchanges to steal Bitcoin, Ethereum, Monero, and Zcash. And the difference between the bank robbers of 1992 and bank robbers of 2022 is that 30 years ago, the criminals were local. They were robbing their own bank. They woke up Monday morning with a headache and no money, so they grabbed a gun and walked into their own bank to steal some cash. The criminals were from the 10-mile radius from the bank that they were robbing. And today, when we look at the online bank robbers, they are not local. They can be, and they really are, anywhere on the planet. Geography has disappeared. And the mankind has walked on this planet 100,000 years. I really like this photo, taken from the moon. That's Earth. That's where we all are. For 100,000 years, the mankind walked the planet for whatever we did, and we did it all offline. We've been offline all this time. We went online during our time. And now the mankind will be online forever. We, you and me, we just happened to be born during this crucial switch when we go from offline world into online world. So if these things sometimes seem awfully complex and hard to understand, it's okay. None of this has never been done before. And we, our generations, we will forever be remembered as the first people who got online. When a future historian writes a history book about the early 2000s, let's say 500 years into the future, and describes us, the very first thing they will tell about us, the very way we will be remembered forever, is that we are the first ones to go online. The first people who live their lives in the real world and in the online world. Biggest technological revolution we've ever seen. If you want to compare the significance of this revolution, the only comparison I can come up with is the revolution which started 150 years ago. 150 years ago, most big cities got their first electricity grid. The revolution of electricity was massive. And today, all modern societies are completely reliant on electricity. I had a really interesting chat with a professor last year. She studies solar storms, and she's confident that we will be facing a global scale solar storm in the next 20 years, which will likely cut off long distance electricity connections for a year or 5. Which is going to be pretty drastic because we can't live without electricity. Modern societies do not function anymore without electricity. That's why when we do have blackouts, they're typically very short. We've built systems so that we can recover very quickly. Because if electricity goes down, nothing works. We can't communicate, we can't move, we can't heat our buildings, we can't make food for our people. The only people who would carry on normally are the people who can grow their own food, which is not most of us. Very few of us can actually do that. So was it a bad choice 150 years ago when our great-grandfathers embraced electricity? No. Clearly, they made the right choice because the upsides we've received from electricity over the last 150 years are obviously much, much larger than the downsides. But we are now reliant on that technology. And my friends, this is exactly the same decision we, you and me, are making right now for future generations about connectivity. It's exactly the same thing. Connectivity isn't yet mandatory, but it will be. Right now, if electricity goes down, we would detect it immediately. This room would be pitch black. If right now connectivity, internet, would go down, we wouldn't notice it from anywhere. In a couple of minutes, some of you would start to wonder why WhatsApp isn't updating or something. But, lights would stay on. Water would still be coming out of the tap. Buses would still run on streets. Planes would still take off. Certainly, airlines wouldn't be selling much tickets. Or, you couldn't do many of the things that we need connectivity for. But the society as a whole would carry on. We would still be able to make food for our people today in 2022. But what's going to be the situation in 20 years? In 20 years, a cut in connectivity is going to be almost as drastic as a cut in electricity. Eventually, it's going to be exactly as drastic. Eventually, let me make a forecast. Eventually, when we have a cut in connectivity, that's going to cause a cut in electricity as well. Because right now, of course, it's the other way around. When we lose power, we lose internet because routers don't work without electricity. What I'm saying is that one day, we will have a problem with connectivity, and that's going to cut electricity. And I know it sounds crazy, but watch me. When it happens, remember I said it. And if it doesn't happen, never mind. So should we then embrace connectivity? Exactly in the same way as our great-grandfathers made the right choice by embracing electricity, we are making the right choice by embracing connectivity, because the upsides are much bigger than the downsides. But we must understand the responsibility we have when we are making this new technology mandatory for future generations. We should not take this lightly, and we must understand the risks it includes, and we must do our best to minimize the risks. But yet, I do believe it is the right choice to make. The upsides are much bigger than the downsides. "5 years ago, I started speaking about cybercrime unicorns. Back then it was a half joke. What I was talking about was a reference to unicorn startup companies, companies valued at over $1 billion, typically technology startups. And I started wondering if one day some of these organized cybercrime gangs would be so powerful and so wealthy, we should be considering them to be unicorns. Well, 5 years ago, that was not so obvious. Today, it's actually getting scarily close to where they are. And there's two reasons why this is happening. The reason number one, the money made by the biggest organized online crime gangs has almost doubled every year for the last 5 years. With attacks like blackmailing with denial of service attacks, taking down online stores, or BEC scams, stealing massive amounts of money from corporations by rewiring money traffic within their financial department, or, of course, ransomware. But that doesn't explain the whole picture. The other part that explains why they have become so wealthy is the fact that they mostly keep their wealth in cryptocurrencies. Over the last 5 years, the amount of the valuation of cryptocurrencies in general has increased 50-fold, 100-fold, depends on the currency you're holding. Certainly there's lots of fluctuation, but overall, if you had a lot of bitcoins 5 years ago, you are wealthy today. And this changes the kind of things the online criminals can do. So what's the first thing they do when they have a lot of money? Well, you know what it is. They go and buy a Ferrari, or a Lambo, or Audi R8. Some of them like to buy Rolls Royces. This is one example. But once they've done the obvious, then many of these gangs start running their operations more professionally. Run their own data centers, hire people to run it professionally. Start to pay monthly or bi-monthly salaries to their employees. Have physical offices. Hire an HR unit, recruiting more hackers to work for them. Set up fake front ends for security companies so you can recruit pen testers to work for you so that they don't even realize that they're working for the enemy. Hire lawyers. Hire business analysts. Business analysts are quite handy for ransomware gangs because when ransomware gangs steal files from the victims, among those files are financial records for the victim company, the bookkeeping records, which you can give to your own criminal business analyst who goes through the books and then tells you exactly how much money you should be asking as a ransom from the victim, which makes the negotiations much, much harder. Oh, we couldn't possibly pay you 5 million euros. Actually, that's exactly what you could pay us because we have your books. Our analysts tells us that that's exactly what you have in cash and in short-term loans and in publicly traded stocks which you could sell overnight. We would like to get 5 million because that's what you could pay us tomorrow. Really nasty scenario, and it's going to get worse. Because what we haven't seen yet is automation on the side of the attackers. We started building the first machine learning frameworks for our company in 2005. Granted, back then we didn't use terms like machine learning or artificial intelligence. We weren't clever enough to figure out that's what it was. We spoke about automation. We're automating our labs' work. Today, our labs, like labs in all security companies, are highly automated. Automatically collect new samples with honeynets and honeypots, bring them into our backend systems, run them in different simulation and virtualization systems with different settings, see what changes when you execute the samples or run the exploits, figure out automatically based on machine learning, is this good? Is this bad? Should we detect this? If we should detect it, automatically build detection, test detection, and deploy it back to clients. Happens very quickly, in minutes. This is all thanks to automation built on top of machine learning. All major advancements in endpoint security over the last 10 years have been thanks to these kind of technologies, which means right now, today, defenders work at machine speed. Attackers work at human speed, especially when you look at things like malware campaigns, like ransomware operations. Think about it. The group behind a new ransomware starts deploying it. They decide to use malicious emails which contain links to websites which contain exploits, which drops a Windows binary on the infected machines, which is then the ransomware. Sure, they start spamming out the emails. Fairly quickly, they'll notice that their emails are blocked and blacklisted by automation built by the defender. So they have to change the emails, change the addresses, rewrite the stuff. Then they realize that the link gets blacklisted, so they need to register new domain names. Then they realize that the actual website based on content is blocked automatically, so they have to recreate the site. Then they realize that the binary is detected by endpoint protection or EDR, XDR, MDR, what have you. So they have to recompile it, add layers of obfuscation, recode it manually. They're doing this manually at human speed. And then when they recreate the attack, it's again blocked with automation at machine speed. This is what's going to change. They will go to machine speed as well. And they haven't yet. How do we know they haven't? Because they're still too slow. Their reactions are so slow, we know they're done by humans. So why haven't they done it already? Because there's such a lack of skill. It's hard to find people who know how to build machine learning frameworks who would be willing to work for the criminals. But clearly the barriers are coming down and the money the attackers can invest is going up. It's going to happen. It's going to happen in the next year or two. And then, my friends, then we will see that the only thing which can stop a bad AI will be a good AI. But it's not all bad news. In fact, I think we are living the golden age for cybersecurity. In many ways, the technical security of our systems has never been better. And I know it doesn't look like that. I know it looks like we're going to hell in handbasket, but it's not the case. We actually have better technical security we've ever had. You look at the security systems you're running. You look at the operating system you have on your computer compared to where we were 10 years ago. It is like night and day. Creating exploits today for modern operating systems is hard. This is why most of the attacks we see go through humans. It's the only really easy route left. And maybe the single biggest security improvement over the last 15 years is this. And I know what you're thinking. What the hell? Why is he showing us a picture of an Xbox? Well, you never hear about malware outbreaks on Xbox, do you? They never get hacked, do they? Funny, isn't it? Because it is a computer. It's a computer which has a CPU, runs code, has RAM, has storage, it's online. What's the operating system inside this computer? It's Windows, because it's made by Microsoft. Yet it's awfully secure. How come? Because it's a closed environment. It's a computer you own, which you, the owner, do not have the right to program. If you have an Xbox, you don't have the right to write programs for it. So it's a closed system, restricted system. And this is a very restrictive environment, but it's also a very secure environment. So why am I speaking about Xboxes? Because this is an Xbox. The phones and the tablets we use have exactly the same security architecture as a games console. The iPad I have right here, I could do anything I could do with my MacBook on this thing. It's a very powerful computer. The only difference to my MacBook is that I can't write code for this one. I'm not allowed to write code and run code on this one. The only way I could run code on my own iPad is to write code and send it to California to be approved by Apple. Then I could run the code on my own device, which is a very, very restrictive model, but also a very safe model. And maybe one of the things we should be doing more is to take away the possibilities for end users to shoot themselves in the foot by not giving them full-blown computers, by giving them more restrictive things, including Chromebooks, which I've actually worked on two cases where companies recovered from ransomware cases, and when they recovered, they deployed Chromebooks to most of their employees. Certainly not everybody can do their work with a Chromebook, but actually a very big part of our employees could. All they need really is a browser. It's kind of hard to hack a system when there is no EXEs you could run on these systems, arbitrary code. And I know what some of you are thinking. Why is he praising the security of these devices when we've all read the headlines about how Pegasus infects iPhones of parliament members and diplomats and the Prime Minister of Spain? Well, my friends, this is not a security failure. This is a success story. This right here is a success story. Why? Because it costs 100,000 euros to hack an iPhone with Pegasus. 100,000 euros, which means not everybody can be targeted. Jeff Bezos can be targeted, and he has been targeted with Pegasus. Prime Minister of Spain can be targeted. Most of us, maybe all of us, none of us, will be targeted by this. Because we are not worth 100,000 euros. This is an example of just how hard it is to break through the barriers we can build into closed environments. It is not a failure, it is a success. Because obviously we cannot create completely unhackable systems. We can just raise the barriers. And if the barriers are 100,000 euros high, they're pretty good barriers. So the only ones left who can do attacks like these are governments. And during this year, this unusual year, we've seen plenty of examples of what governments are willing to do with offensive cyber attacks. When I hop on a car in my home and drive to the nearest highway, there's a road sign not too far away from my home in Helsinki which says St. Petersburg, 270 kilometers. I live not next door, but close by to Russia. Both my grandfathers fought the Russians in the Second World War. We've always had a very big and very unpredictable neighbor. And when tanks crossed the borders from Russia to Ukraine on the 24th of February, in many ways the world changed. We right now have a war in Europe, in the very center of Europe. And it's been full of surprises. In the beginning, we saw plenty of activity which we attributed back to the Russian government. But the last major attack like that we saw in the end of April. That was the Destroyer 2, with which they tried cutting power again in Ukraine and failed this time. Since then, we've seen plenty of attacks which are linked to the crisis, or to the war, but which are not done by the government, but are done by patriotic hackers, groups like Killnet or No Name 57 or Hacksnet, or done by cybercrime gangs aligning themselves or their interests with their homeland, Russia. But these are not part of the government. Now this is quite surprising. We don't really know why. My best theory on why Russian government hasn't been using more cyber power during the war since April is that right now the war is being run by old school generals who believe that the role of cyber belongs to the beginning of the war, to soften the enemy before real war starts. But then when missiles start flying and bombs start dropping, cyber takes the back seat. That's maybe what they're thinking right now. And of course, that's not the way it would have to be, but maybe that is the explanation. It is a bit of a mystery. So we are living in the middle of the biggest technological revolution in mankind's history. It's kind of hard for us to see just how big the revolution is because we are living dead center in the middle of it. But we will be remembered forever as the first generation in mankind's history which went online. And the internet truly is the best thing and the worst thing which has happened during our time. Thank you very much. All right. Shall we take some questions? All right. One or two questions from the audience. Anybody? And to make it more exciting, the first question will get a copy of my book. Right there. All right. You're not going to get a copy of the book. I will give you a signed punch card so you can use it as a bookmark in your book because that's what I do.
Yep. So you mentioned the cost barrier, the 100,000 to use Pegasus. When do you see the commoditization of that kind of software?
Right. Yep, certainly the tricks used in the Pegasus we've seen, the exploits and the exploit chains we've seen used in Pegasus developed by NSO in Israel, they've been changing all the time because Apple keeps closing the holes. So the window of opportunity, of course, is there. But if you consistently are able to create exploit chains which are able to exploit systems which are so hard to exploit than iPhone right now is, the value for that will remain high. Apple has proven that they're able to fix these very quickly. And Apple, or in particular iOS and iPadOS, has remarkably quick update rate. When you look at statistics, how quickly people update to the latest version of Android, it takes years. How quickly people update to the latest version of iOS and iPadOS, it takes a week or two, which is surprising. So, sure, it does bring opportunities for criminals, like Pegasus is used by governments, but the window of opportunity is still fairly small. It is still, in my book, a success story. It's probably the best example we have of security created by closed systems. And I'll get you a punch card after this.
You mentioned that it's inevitable that we're going to have a society based on connectedness. Is it inevitable that that's going to be a centralized, surveillance-based connected economy, or is there a possibility of having a society that's more like the original intent of the internet, decentralized and heterogeneous?
Well, right now it doesn't look very good, does it? Unfortunately, many of the big innovations didn't turn out to create the kind of society we were wishing for. Email is a prime example. We all used to run our own websites. We all used to run our own email servers. Today, pretty much nobody runs their own personal website anymore, and companies don't run their own email servers anymore. And of course, social media is as centralized as it possibly could. There seems to be the attitude of winner takes it all because there's so much money to be made. When the web came around, I set up the first website for our company in April 1994. There was like 15 websites in our country at the time. And when we saw visitors coming in and browsing content on our website, it clicked. This works. People come here. This is easy to use, like a web with images and links, and you can click on it. Anybody could use this. This is going to grow. It's going to be a success story. But then we were chatting about it in the lab, like, okay, if this is going to grow, and if you're going to have lots of websites and lots of content and maybe news or weather reports, even movies online one day, how are we going to pay for it? Because clearly newspapers are not going to bring their stories online for free. There's got to be a payment mechanism. And the way we figured it's going to work in 1994 is that browsers will have a payment button. I want to read this news article. Click and I pay 5 cents, 2 cents, half a cent to read the article. That was 1994. 25 years later, we still don't have the button in our browsers. Instead, we came up with this completely different way of paying for content, which is profiling the users and selling access to advertisers to target us through that kind of profiling, which I clearly didn't see coming. And it's a prime example of the worry you have. We are going towards more centralized and towards a society which doesn't preserve or respect our privacy. And for that, you get a copy of my book. Find me after that. Thank you very much. Thank you.